Welcome to Tech Intersect. I'm your host, Tanya Evans, and my life and work exist at the heart of law, business, and technology. Yeah, I've earned a few fancy titles and degrees over the years, but the bottom line is I'm a writer, speaker, teacher, and lifelong learner. And I'm really excited that you've joined me on this journey. So what is Tech Intersect? Well, it's authentic, empowering conversations with really interesting guests to demystify complex topics to prepare you for the future. Because your future is now. And it exists where law, business, and tech intersect. Get ready to listen, learn, and leverage. Let's get started. In this episode of Tech Intersect, I speak with Hamza Khan, a multi-award-winning marketer, best-selling author, and global keynote speaker whose TEDx talk, Stop Managing, Start Leading, has been viewed over 1 million times. He is a top-ranked university educator, serial entrepreneur, and well-respected thought leader whose insights have been featured by notable media outlets like Vice, Business Insider, and The Globe and Mail. He empowers youth and early talent through his work as managing director of Student Life Network, Canada's largest and most comprehensive education resource platform, which reaches over 2.7 million students. From TEDx stages and international conferences to MBA classrooms and Fortune 500 boardrooms, Hamza is invited regularly to deliver keynotes and workshops around the world. His clients have included some of the world's most dynamic companies and organizations, including PepsiCo, LinkedIn, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Trivago, and over 100 colleges and universities. So I am absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to connect with him on Tech Intersect and, of course, to share his light and laughter and lessons with you, of course, my favorite listeners. Before we jump into the episode, take a moment to like, share, and comment so that others who would benefit from this content can actually find it. Also, I invite you to attend an upcoming free masterclass to learn about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and the future of money in this new digital cash economy. If you are tired of wasting time trying to break in and figure out crypto markets alone, curious but confused about what crypto is and how it works, afraid you'll miss out on another chance to ride another tech or finance wave like Bitcoin, scared to invest in crypto because, well, you think it's illegal or unsafe, or if you want to be on the leading edge to prepare for blockchain's disruptive impact in your industry, then this free masterclass is for you. Seize the opportunity to learn before you earn, and definitely before you get burned. I'll give you the unbiased facts in plain language, set you up with a wallet, and give you a solid foundation in the future of money. Register right now at fromcashtocrypto.com. That's fromcashtocrypto.com. Okay, it's time to listen, learn, and leverage. Let's get started. In this episode of Tech Intersect, I welcome Hamza Khan to the show. He is a multi-award-winning marketer, best-selling author, global educator, and renowned keynote speaker, and also, I've come to learn, a recovering overachiever. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Instantly, I feel seen, heard, and acknowledged, and we haven't even started our speaking yet, but we will. And I recall watching Hamza's TEDx UTSC talk, The Burnout Gamble. And he had me at insane travel schedule, overbooked, being out of sync, mind, body, and spirit. And I knew I had to connect with him to talk about what productivity looks like in a Web 3.0 world and how to avoid this thing we call burnout so we don't just survive, but thrive. We'll talk about all of that in a moment. But first, Hamza, welcome.
Wow, Dr. Evans, what an introduction. And as I said right before we hit record, this is an absolute honor. I can't tell you how important this is to me. I am seeing in you somebody who is extending the runway of what's possible for someone like me. So thank you for all that you do. It's just such a pleasure to be here.
Excellent, excellent. I appreciate you so much. And before we jump in, I want to just authentically check in with you, the you that most people may not see, because outside looking in, oftentimes when you appear to have everything, all the ducks in a row, nobody checks for you. Nobody says, oh, they seem to be doing great on the Twitters, so I'm sure they're fine. And that might be the case, but how are you in the midst of this pandemic and the extraordinary change and the longest month of any year that we've just experienced, from insurrection to impeachment to inauguration? And we are recording at a time when it's still the same month. So how are you?
Wow. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you asking that question. I know that it's coming from your heart. I know that it's coming from deep within your soul. So I feel seen. I feel like this is a safe place where I can say to your listeners, to you, that I'm just okay. And had you asked me this question 2 or 3 years ago, my answer would have been some hyperbolic version of good, great, amazing, excellent. But the truth is, just like you and all of our listeners, I'm dealing with the ambient stress of COVID-19, and not just the health pandemic, but perhaps the triple pandemic, if we want to call it that, talking about the pandemic of racial inequality, the economy in free fall. It's just a very surreal time to be alive. And I have to constantly remind myself that even though I did everything that I normally do to show up and be present for this conversation, that I'm not simply recording a podcast from home. I'm not simply teaching from home. I'm not simply working from home. I am quarantined at home,
right,
grappling with the existential dread of the predicament that we find ourselves in. And every bit of productivity that I have is, cherries on the cake. This is not my baseline. This is not my best. Right. I'm hanging in there. And I wanted to ask the question of you as well, Doctor, for your listeners to understand sort of where you're at, and for me to even appreciate how somebody much more further along in their career and with a much more nuanced and well-defined, well-developed thought process. How are you making meaning of this?
Thank you for asking. That's an important thing. The short answer is I am well, but this version of myself takes a lot of energy.
Wow.
Takes a lot of energy.
Well said.
And so I've been even more mindful. I have always worked to focus my time and my talents to really make sure that I'm connected. The mind, body, spirit is connected. And I work really hard. I've added more things to my schedule in terms of quote unquote self-care, starting the day, literally reminding myself to smile when I wake up, or warming up my eyes, whatever my meditative experience is going to be. Sometimes it is literally the 5 minutes. I was like, I don't know if I can do 20 minutes, and I darn sure can't do an hour today, but I can do 5. And 5 is better than none.
Wow.
And taking things out of my schedule it generally makes me very nervous because there's always something I could be doing, which is the perfectionist in me slowly peeling away the layers that over the years and the decades have built up when I approach the world of next thing, multitasking is great, right? And I know you're going to talk me off of that ledge. I'm working hard internally, but it's important to continue to remember it. I also I'm an only child, and I'm a Gen Xer. So I was literally raised for this moment to be alone by myself.
You're the latchkey generation, right?
I'm the latchkey generation. The phone has to ring twice, hang up, and call back again before I even think about answering it. I'm not opening the doors, right? All of the things. So in some sense, but we were talking before the record about travel. And it was easier for me to do that when I was going out into the world. And then I could choose when I came back in to close the door and do the very thing I'm doing now, not because I'm forced to, but because I'm an extroverted introvert. So I actually get my energy by being still. So all of that being said, my family is well. Both of my parents are well on their way to their second shot for the vaccine.
Knock on wood. Yep.
I didn't have to twist their arms to stay in, to do all of the things. Work is bananas. It's just off the chain. So I'm working, I'm well fed, but I will not minimize the energy depletion that is going on and being mindful of it. So that's where I am.
That's incredible. And, the listeners are unable to see this. We don't have the video component yet, but you're radiating energy and I can see it, even though we're many, many miles away from each other. And we're interfacing via the screen, it's very clear to me as somebody who also is investing disproportionately in self-care. My morning routines, for instance, used to be 2 hours. Now they're 5 hours. 5 hours of just puttering in the morning, of meditation, gratitude, working out, stillness, reflection, in order for me to show up during a time like this. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that's so critical to the conversation we're about to have about beating burnout, building resilience, achieving peak performance, and unlocking productivity. Just thinking about your portfolio of work, to say that you do one thing would be a gross understatement. It would be absolutely incorrect. I mean, you are a professor, you have multiple podcasts, public speaker, and these are just the obligations that I'm aware of. You have the Advantage Evans Academy. I mean, what don't you do? You are pouring from what seems to be a reservoir of energy and love and abundance, but make no mistake about it. You and I both know, and I'm learning more about you in this conversation, there's a lot that happens every single day to fill that well so that others can benefit from it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well said. Thank you. I appreciate you so much. So let's set the table for the conversation and level set in terms of your understanding of what it even means to be an overachiever. I think each of us, particularly if you're already listening to Tech Intersect, you're of a special ilk. You're already probably a high achieving person, maybe juggling a lot of things. And I have to say for myself, there were times I didn't even understand that. I call myself a high achiever, and then people tell me to go sit down, and they irritate me because I don't see it. I see it now. They were like, "Oh, she doesn't even know." Right. So what does overachiever mean to you?
Wow. It's impossible for me to have this conversation, to talk about this without acknowledging our respective intersectionalities. And so this has been a process of unlearning and relearning who I am as Hamza Khan. I'm the son of immigrant parents. I was born into rather low and almost desperate socioeconomic circumstances. My parents are, relatively uneducated. My father only completed the equivalent of high school. My mother completed some college. I didn't have many opportunities. I don't think I had much privilege beyond sort of the geographic lottery of being born in North America. Then, of course, you can factor in things like being able-bodied and, all of the sort of other things that allowed me to experience some privilege. But relatively speaking, I think I felt tremendous performance pressure from a very young age. I was just joking with my father the other day. I was born shortly after Black Monday. So I was born into a recession. And then I graduated into the 2008 financial crisis. Wow. And then I think I've started to hit my prime as a professional in the coronavirus pandemic. So all of my life has been one big downturn. So I don't actually have any vivid memory or recollection of any time that worked in my favor.
Right.
So what that did for me, Dr. Evans, is it, and this again was a gradual process of unlearning and relearning. Mm-hmm. I found myself burning out time and time again. I burned out as a student in high school. I burned out as an undergraduate student. I burned out as an intern, as a young professional. There was a pattern that was beginning to form. And then it happened in the worst way possible. And I believe it was 2014, when I had my last big bout of occupational burnout. And it was a particularly devastating one because it cost me a lot of professional connections. It harmed my reputation in some irreparable ways. I don't have much to show for that year of productivity, even though if you go on my social media, you look on Instagram, I was saying all the things. I was like, hustle until you don't have to. One that I just kept over there's like, hustle until you no longer have to introduce yourself. And there was another one that said, the beard never retires. And there was another one saying, push harder. I mean, just a lot of expressions of toxic productivity.
Right.
But where that was coming from, where did I learn these things, Dr. Evans? I learned them because I would watch my dad and my mom work very hard to provide a life for my sister and I. And that included waking up very early, coming home late, having very little time for themselves or leisure time. I think my dad has taken 2 vacations in his entire life, my mom and dad together. My mom worked very tirelessly as a homemaker and then also as our tutor. I mean, it was just presented to me in the format of success is the result of hard work. That's all I knew. And so when I started to apply myself academically, personally, and professionally, I applied myself with a level of tenacity and intensity that led me to burnout every single time. There was no conversation about sustainable success, about being enough for myself, about, not anchoring my sense of self in how society sees me necessarily. And so I subscribe to these myths that many of the listeners subscribe to, this myth that we're not progressive enough, that we're not efficient enough, that we're not perfect enough, that we're not satisfied enough, that we're not innovative enough. And when the goalposts keep on shifting, we find ourselves overworking and then overachieving. And so, sorry, that was a long-winded way to come back to your initial question, Dr. Evans. What does it mean for me to be an overachiever? That means not feeling like I'm enough for myself. Therefore, I have to act out and manifest levels of intensity across the board that lead me to then implode.
You love listening to podcasts, but have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Maybe you want to build a brand, grow your business, or are looking for an excuse to talk about your favorite hobby. Whatever your reason for making a podcast, Buzzsprout is the place to start. Since 2009, Buzzsprout has helped over 300,000 people launch their own podcasts. Buzzsprout walks you step by step through the whole process and will give you powerful tools to start, grow, and monetize your podcast. Ready to get started? Click the link in the show notes to get our free step-by-step guide to starting your podcast today.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of Tech Intersect. Our conversation will continue in a moment, but first, a word on an exciting opportunity.
There's a more cost-effective and time-efficient way to reach your leading-edge learning and earning goals, to put you ahead of the stiff competition in this fast-paced, tech-driven economy. You need skills, credentials, and a fast track to a competitive advantage. You need it now more than ever, and I can help. The Advantage Evans method puts you ahead of the curve with condensed, comprehensive online courses, curated content to leverage your current skills and expertise, live coaching, networking opportunities, and more. Upcoming courses include From Cash to Crypto to help you buy your first Bitcoin, and there are 2 ways to get your advantage. Advantage Evans Encore gives you maximum experience for your total competitive advantage and access for 1 year. It includes a live welcome and modules on terminology, buying and selling, exchanges, mining, earning crypto, trading and investing, and also several of the legal issues you need to know in order to be safe and secure as you enter this space. That includes tax compliance, how to plan for a Bitcoin estate, and securities laws to make sure you avoid any legal unforced errors. Now, Advantage Core gives you the essentials. It's a short course to give you what you want and the support you need to buy your first crypto in as little as 3 weeks, with access to the information and replays for 3 months. And if you're not quite ready for your Advantage and want a sneak peek to try before you buy, then register for a free masterclass where I share my Crypto 101 success checklist and cover current hot topics in crypto. So there truly is something for everyone, including you, to get in on the fast track and learn and earn in the digital economy. Visit AdvantageEvans.com to get started. That's AdvantageEvans.com.
And now, back to the conversation.
Do you find that that is cultural? Because as you're describing your experience, and I think of my upbringing as a young African-American girl and the mantra of having to be 3 times better to have half of a chance. My father is a surgeon. My mother is a patent attorney. So even when I think of one generation before, on my father's side, neither paternal grandmother or grandfather finished high school. On my mother's side, it was different. And my grandmother owned this piece of land that she inherited from her father who passed. He bet literally the farm on her.
Wow.
She lost her mother early. Neither of her brothers finished high school because they had to work. So he decided that she should be educated. And she went on to get an advanced degree and to literally sell timber off of that plot of land to send my mother and her 2 brothers through school.
Wow.
And so that was always the expectation. There was no discussion that we wouldn't go to college. There was no discussion that or space for what might be perceived as failure. And success looks like lawyer, doctor, any
Right.
type of doctor.
Well, now vice
Something,
president too, right?
I mean, the bar went. The bar
just went here.
I mean, where do we go from here? Right?
Yes.
So you find it to be cultural instead the cultural pressure to be an overachiever.
Oh, absolutely. And I've had to sort of go back and edit some memories. I didn't believe up until this conversation or very recently, in leading up to this conversation, that I've experienced explicit discrimination and racism. But the truth is, looking back, even though somebody didn't look at me and, call me, for instance, Packy, or, use some sort of derogatory slur, I do think that I have been and I'm actually certain that I've been at the receiving end of some exclusionary behavior, that I've been the victim of unconscious bias in the workplace. And, you said it best in your case as an African-American woman, just objectively speaking, along those two vertices, you have to work 3 to 4 times harder. And that's a conservative estimate to make just the same amount of money as your Caucasian male counterparts. And it's an absolute travesty that we're even having this conversation in 2021. But then I know that you are very tuned into the zeitgeist. One look through your Instagram feed and you're plugged into the conversation. I'm sure you saw this infographic speaking about VP Kamala Harris. You must have seen this infographic that laid out all of the images of every single U.S. vice president. And it said just 5 vice presidents ago, you couldn't even, I'm going to get this wrong, but basically showing all of the different obstacles in terms of you didn't have voting rights, you weren't considered an equal, and then blah, blah, blah. I mean, we just didn't mean to diminish that using those words over there, but it makes me frustrated to know that it's not enough for us to be average. We actually have to, in order to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be rewarded in the system that exists, we have to express ourselves in extraordinary ways. And as a result, we are paying an invisible tax, and that invisible tax is our health and well-being. And perhaps, a topic that is, recurs throughout your podcast, Dr. Evans, generational wealth. Perhaps that we're leaving money on the table. We talked about setting the table earlier. We're leaving money on the table in this pursuit of burning ourselves out to just get to the table in the first place.
Right. And the toll, you say it so well, that there is a price that is paid, obviously internally and intergenerationally, but for the world. The world is worse off when we can't be fully expressed as our best. And so absolutely, that is a common theme that runs through this podcast and certainly the way I move through the world, and also just focusing at this point on controlling the controllables. I hate to use the word control, but focusing my time, attention, my energy on what is in front of me and what actually does bring me joy, what actually does add value, the way to make deposits back into my own mental wealth account, as Anthony Ware would say. I cannot take pride in that those are his words. But
you could remix that and call it your crypto account, and then you could put the Dr. Evans stamp on it.
That's right. We will have a mental wealth coin coming to a crypto near you.
MWC on the stock exchange, except don't invest via Robinhood. You heard it from me first.
Right. The IOU. Unless you deal in IOUs, I strongly encourage you to just own your own things, but I digress. So that leads me to a conversation around the burnout gamble.
Yes.
So we set the stage in terms of overachiever and the context in which we grew up, where there wasn't really an option to do anything else, and then certainly acknowledging the tax. So is that the gamble? What's the burnout gamble?
If you're an engineer or a scientist, you love Formula One, you love cycling, you love learning about how new technologies are changing the world around us, then I thought you may want to listen into my new podcast, the Neil Ashton Podcast. We talk to leading engineers and scientists from around the world, hear about their life stories, hear about new technologies, and hopefully educate you and give you a better sense of how key things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, supercomputing are changing the world around us. If that sounds like it's something you might like, you should come and have a listen.
Yes, great question. So the burnout gamble is an axiom that I arrived at as somebody who still wanted to achieve a level of success that was eluding me, but was within reach. And it's this idea that success requires effort. There's no other way around it. I mean, unless you're born into immense privilege, just obscene privilege, for the rest of us, success requires effort. And even then, in the previous example that I gave, I think it's only a matter of time because the world is changing so rapidly that people who are complacent, who stay the same, are at risk of losing whatever grounding they have. But
right.
I digress. Success requires effort. Effort induces stress. And the third variable, or the third part of this axiom, is the one that we can change. So the first two are set in stone. Success requires effort. Effort induces stress. That is a universal set of principles. But the third is stress can lead to burnout. The third one is what we can change, right? It doesn't have to lead to burnout. It can lead to burnout. And according to the World Health Organization, stress is the health epidemic of the 21st century. And in 2019, they upgraded the definition of occupational burnout to reflect the realities that sprang forth from this exploration of this axiom, which is burnout is the result of workplace stress, chronic workplace stress that has gone unmanaged. And so if we can manage it, if we can manage our stress, anticipate it, and develop better habits, I mean, I'm just giving just a quick top level overview of sort of the things that are involved in mitigating the stress that can lead to burnout, then the third part of that axiom doesn't have to necessarily play out the way that it does for so many of us, myself included in the past. Stress doesn't have to lead to burnout, and we can control that. Going back to your idea of controllables, Dr. Evans.
Right. And so what does that look like in this fast-paced, tech-driven world? We talked about a bit of my work, and it's almost like you can't unplug. First of all, on the crypto side, it's 24/7, 365. There are no holidays. Right. There's no back-end stopping. It marches on. You can go to sleep if you want to, but when you wake up to a different world.
Yes.
And that in and of the fast-paced nature, I don't necessarily have to imagine, but feeds into this idea of the stress level because of the dynamic nature of how everything is evolving so much more rapidly. I had a conversation with a friend recently, and we compared it to birth pangs. And so we're wondering what is being birthed in this moment, because as you get closer and closer and closer and closer to that moment, it becomes more intense, more intense, more intense, more intense. And I feel like we're just feeling it far more rapidly.
Right.
And so that's how I've started to think about it and write about it. But
Wow.
How does that level of the meteoric pace of it all feed into this idea of burnout?
Oh my goodness. Wow. We could easily just do like 2 to 3 hours on this topic alone. So I'll try to contain it within the acronym that I coined in producing the Burnout Gamble book. I used two sets of acronyms. The first was CASTLE and the second was PEPSI. So CASTLE are those factors that are outside of our control. Global competition, increasing feelings of alienation in this largely digital world where we're becoming further and further removed from other people, but also the means of production. And then you think about, even alluding to our conversation about Robinhood earlier, right? You can't really hold it. There's the IOU element to this. And so we could just do another hour on that. Then there's just these toxic messages that are prevailing through society. This idea of fail fast, fail forward, and pick yourself up by the bootstraps. And, there's a lot of listeners who are like, yeah, but that's how I did it. But the truth is, I would encourage you, like myself, to acknowledge how much privilege goes into those statements. These ideas of fail fast, fail forward, they make sense for someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who, if Mark were to fail, he can fall back on a trust fund and still have a roof over his head and 3 meals a day and access to a computer. But you say that to somebody living in the inner city with 3 kids, juggling this by themselves, fail fast is potentially fatal. Then there's technology, which is at the intersect, no pun intended, intersection, no pun intended, of our worlds over here. And so technology, I come back to this quote from Ray Kurzweil, or this idea from Ray Kurzweil, Google futurist, that by the year 2045, this device in my pocket, or this device over here, right, will effectively outpace my intelligence and your intelligence combined, that the singularity is going to happen by that point. And so in that future where everything that can be automated is automated, what jobs are left for us to do? And so anybody who has work right now that is scalable, that is repeatable, that is routinized, I would encourage you to think very quickly. You don't have as much time as you may believe before your job can be reduced down to an algorithm. And that's a huge component of what I do as well. I'm an educator just like yourself. Dr. Evans, there's a version of our industry where our academic supervisors or the department heads in your case come to you and say, so Dr. Evans, we're just going to record you once and we're going to upload you into the cloud and we're just going to update a couple of slides here and there and we no longer require your services. That is potentially going to happen when you're seeing the rise of platforms like Skillshare, Teachable, Masterclass. And it's making me very, very nervous. But I digress. Then you have in the CASTL, we get to loneliness. This one factor that really opened up my eyes to the realities of loneliness around the world. But even coming back home, I read a stat the other day saying that 1 in 5 millennials in Canada don't have any friends.
Wow.
And isn't that ironic when you look at just how the growth stats on social networks, you look at new platforms like Clubhouse, for instance, where everyone is connecting, but how many people everyone is connected, but how many people are truly connecting? And then we go to the final factor, the one that is just at the time of this recording, fascinating the world and enraging many of us, the economy. And we're seeing now, especially through this GameStop fiasco, we're sort of stumbling upon the architecture of just how corrupt and self-serving this whole system is, that it's rewarding the existing power structures, which, I don't want to get into it on this podcast, but there's a very strong argument about systemic racism and how that's closely linked to the economic structure of North America or even the world. So we'll save that for another time. So there's the castle factors, the factors from without, and then real quick, how we react to that, how we internalize that as overachievers, because those are so outside of our control. We then subscribe to the myths that I alluded to earlier, the Pepsi myths: progress, efficiency, perfection, satisfaction, innovation. And when you combine the castle factors and the Pepsi myths, and if you're not fully invested in this idea that we can be enough, that we in and of ourselves are enough, then we experience the sort of performance pressure that leads people to burnout.
That is so powerful. First of all, the trademark attorney in me loves a good acronym. And it's memorable too, and it's very poignant. And trust me, the only thing constraining us right now is time, because we have the full space for the subjects that you raised, and that means that you're going to have to come back and spend some more time. I want to leave listeners with, before we tell them how they can learn more about you and your work, one thing that the overachiever who is listening to us right now can do so that they have a level of satisfaction and achievement doing less but gaining more, becoming less, as you have talked about, less of the human doing and more of the human being.
Okay, wow. It's hard for me to pick one. I have so many of these go-to exercises, but one that's very actionable for the listeners to implement today. We spend so much time, especially when we're trying to curb and mitigate burnout, managing our time, right? We have the same 168 hours in a week as a template, but of course, depending on your circumstances, you might not have the full access to all of the hours available to you for whatever reason. The one thing that we often neglect is managing our energy. And this is something that I've had to learn the hard way. And it helps me to visualize my energy in 4 distinct buckets. There's physical energy, there's mental energy, there's emotional energy, and spiritual energy. So just like how Dr. Evans, you described sort of what your morning routine looks like and the things that you do to show up and be present, I would encourage the listeners to think of their energy along those lines and have an audit, have a check-in with themselves every day to ask, what did they do to replenish those energy buckets? Because if your time is optimized and you're still running into challenges, you're still burning out, you're still finding yourself stressed, that's probably a good indication that you might not be optimizing and managing your energy well. And so if you can start to do that, I promise you that you're going to see considerable possibilities open up for you, and you're going to see gains in all levels of your life if you can start to manage your energy. Wow, I wish we could, just go on and on over here. I have so much more to say, but you are such a great host, Dr. Evans, and you bring out the best in me. So thank you.
I love it. When we finish this, let's talk about a follow-up. This needs to be some type of multi-part series, because I've enjoyed the connection, and this
Likewise.
is the first, but it's certainly not the last for you and I, and also for you and my listeners. So I will drop your links in the show notes, but please tell them how they can learn more about you and your work.
Absolutely. And so we just arrived at that precipice where we were about to start talking about the role of leadership when it comes to burnout. And I wanted to share some of my recent research on the subject.
Excellent.
So on that note, you can find out more about me at hamzakhan.ca. That's my website. And then you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, where I'm the most active, at Hamza K. And what you'll see in the coming weeks, Dr. Evans, this is probably the first US-based podcast where I'm announcing that I have a new book coming out called Leadership Reinvented. And a lot of what we talked about today naturally finds itself in over there. And if you'd be open to it, Dr. Evans, I'd love to send you a copy of the book, an advanced copy. Nothing would make me happier than for you to adorn your bookshelf with it, hopefully.
This is amazing. And I'm getting together my bookshelf. I'm reorganizing some things. So you're catching me in the midst of that. So let's do this. You now have all of the witnesses who are listening. You'll come back on and talk about the book. It would be my honor and pleasure. What's your drop date? What's the pub date?
March 9th. Thank you. And it's called Leadership Reinvented. And it's really about this new paradigm that we find ourselves in. You know, you talked about the birth pains, the birth pangs.
Yes.
The thing that's coming, I believe, is a new consciousness, a new way of thinking, being, and doing that is rooted in a long overdue Great Reset, this idea that the world has been clamoring for a more sustainable, equitable, diverse, and inclusive life for not just stakeholders and shareholders, but especially for the people, the environment, society, and the world at large. And so how can leaders position themselves for that world is sort of what I really tried to communicate in this book.
That's extraordinary. I'm really, really excited about that. I will reach out after this. We will schedule for March for that conversation. Is your book in pre-order now?
It is in pre-order, not quite yet, but as of February 8th, it will be in pre-order. So you're so inspiring with your consistency with this podcast. I know that by the time listeners hear this, it'll probably be wherever they're listening to podcasts.
Absolutely. So this will definitely go up early February. I'll have you back in March. We'll talk specifically about the book and continue this excellent conversation and connection. Hamza Khan, I appreciate you, brother, and I look forward to the continued connection.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so very much to Hamza for all of the light and insight and inspiration he shared today. And of course, to you listeners, I hope that you were as inspired by this conversation as I was when I was having it. Hamza shared wonderful gems and brought all of his light and insight to this episode. And I look forward to having him back again soon to talk about his new book. So, what one thing will you do to transition from human doing to human being? How will you audit your energy drains and personal and professional relationships to do more with less? How will you reorder your to-dos to ensure that list includes you? Definitely let me know. Drop a comment, tweet me, and please take a moment to like, comment, and share this episode and this podcast with your networks. Follow me on social medias and let me know what topics you'd like to hear more of and who you'd like to hear from. All right, that's all for this episode. Until next time, continue to shine.
Stay in touch with host Tanya Evans via your favorite social media. On Twitter at TechIntersect and on Instagram via the handle TechIntersect. This podcast has been produced by Stephanie Renee for Soul Sanctuary Incorporated.